Hello, good afternoon or good morning, depending of where in the world you're watching. So, welcome to the second day of the A4Q World Congress second edition. We have today another special guest, Graham Bath, with us today. He's having very exciting presentation awaiting. I'm not going to take too much of his time. I just would like to say to everyone watching that this is a live session and it's going to be streaming on social media. So, if you do have any questions for Graham, at the end of his presentation, do put them in the comments section and we can do a very quick Q&A afterwards. Just for those that don't know Graham, Graham is a long-standing member of the German Testing Board and is a frequent presenter and tutorial provider at conferences around the world. Graham is the ISTQB Working Group Chair for the Specialist Level Certified Tester Qualification. Today, Graham is going to be talking about improving test processes, past, present, and future. So, without taking too much of your time, Graham, I'm putting your presentation now in screen and passing this on to you now.
Thank you very much, and hello everybody, and welcome. Today, as was just mentioned, I'm going to be talking to you about improving test process. It's something I've been doing for many a year, and so I felt it was maybe a good time to sit down and talk to you about how I've seen improving test process in the past, what the situation is now, and maybe some tips on what I see as being the future of test process improvement. So, what are we going to be doing? We're going to be looking at those three elements. I'm going to be mentioning some of the main approaches that we've used in the past for test process improvement. And I'm going to be bringing in some of my personal experience. Over the last 2 years, I've been fortunate enough to interview well over 100 people, I guess, on what they do in their projects in the way of testing and developing as well, actually. And I've used some of the information and if you like, the conclusions that I've drawn from all of those interviews, I've used those to bring together a few points for you as well. So without further ado, let's go back to the past. And by this, I mean the dark, distant past. Those were the days when test processes pretty much could be categorized as immature, like not much happening in the way of process, but if you had a good so-called local champion, they were a good substitute for a well-defined managed test process if you had them. And they could do all your testing and know what to do. The trouble is, if you didn't have the local champion, then you got back to a situation where your testing was at best going to be ad hoc, and your approach to test process improvement was going to be pretty much ad hoc, if not non-existent. It was a bad place to be. Now, the response to that, as many of you may recall, was that development organizations and standards organizations started to think about the subject of process maturity. And they developed some so-called process maturity models. And I'm sure that many of you have heard of CMMI and ISO 15504, formerly SPICE. And those were for software development, and the testing organizations that were involved in professional testing picked up on that idea and developed their own maturity models specifically for testing. And there's a couple there that you may have heard of. They're still active, in particular TMMI, Test Maturity Model Integrated. It's a similar kind of approach to CMMI, and Test Process Improvement Next, TPI Next. So those was kind of the responses to the dark days when there was no way to actually find out what your process was like and improve it. So what they did was they actually succeeded in putting the subject of test process improvement onto the map. So, it was possible now at project level and at organizational level to consider test process improvement. Well, great. And those were the days when you could do that sort of thing. You still can actually, but the present situation has changed compared to those days. Where are we now? Well, in this section, I want to just briefly talk to you about the results of what I've discovered from talking to a lot of people, well over 100 people. These are young people, software developers and testers who are working in large organizations. That could be, as you see there, banking, insurance, and so on, but also quite a lot of smaller organizations with less than 10 staff. So what have I found by talking to those people quite extensively about what they do? Well, guess what? And this will come as no surprise to you. About 90% of those people that I spoke to said that they were doing some form of agile. They were using an agile approach in their development, and the testing was matching that. About 30% of them had fully embraced an agile Scrum type approach. Now, the remainder were using a kind of a subset of agile practices. That could be anything from at the bottom level, where we just do daily stand-ups, to at a more mature level, okay, a large number of practices being done and rituals performed. So what was the principal motivation of those people to adopt Agile? And I'll get back to the point of test process improvement shortly. But first, what's the principal motivation? Well, they said that they needed to do a lot of change work. So the ability to deal with changes was very significant for those people, and that's why they adopted Agile. Stronger collaboration with all stakeholders, more frequent communication, improved efficiency by focusing on tools and automation. Those are the big points about Agile that, if you like, confirm what many people have been saying about the adoption of Agile. Now, the thing is, what about test process improvement with, in that kind of context? Well, as the adoption of Agile came along, it became clear to me from all these interviews, not all organizations actually have dedicated software testing professionals. So, even where they are employed, even where you do find them, they're increasingly a different type of tester, much more technical and much more skilled in the area of test automation. So, if you're looking at a project-centric approach, that's what they were doing in their software testing as well. It was, if you like, here is my project. I'm responsible for testing this. This is what I'm going to do for my project. So the organizational kind of view, the organization-centric view, seemed to be rarely taken. Very few people actually saying, okay, I've got a group of 10 different projects here, all doing some form of Agile. How can we make some kind of process improvement that will benefit all of those projects, rather than them approaching things from just their project-centric view? So that kind of shocked me just a little bit. I thought that there was more organizational consideration taking place, but not really. So, why was that? Well, it was principally time-driven. Projects lacking the time and the expertise, actually, to take, if you like, the traditional test process improvement models I mentioned before, like TMMI, and actually adapt them and shoehorn them into their Agile context. Quite a skilled job to do that. And I think that many people tried that. And although these models like TMMI do give you some support on how to do that, it's still quite a highly skilled job. And remember, a lot of Agile projects are small, and the people involved simply didn't have the time. Very often, they didn't have the expertise to actually roll out one of these, if you like, industry standard models to help them with their test process improvement. And that was a thing, a feature, a development that came through in all of these discussions that we were having. So what really are the consequences? Well, it's a bit sad in a way, but actually it means that in particular in projects, the approach that was being used for test process improvement is generally ad hoc. Oh, hang on a minute. Weren't we there before? Wasn't that what we had way back when we had no real model to follow, when we didn't have a standard type of process implemented? This was sort of like, I would talk to people and ask them about their test process improvement in their agile projects, and they would say, well, sometimes we talk about it in our daily stand-ups. Sometimes we talk about it in our retrospectives. Sometimes we talk about it in our sprint planning meetings and such like that. Well, that's good, but it was still ad hoc in the sense that it wasn't on the agenda. If you wanted to bring it onto the agenda, you would do that, and you could do that, but people didn't because the awareness wasn't there, and so the whole thing, if you like, returned to kind of a process of where the champions would come along and say, "Oh, I know how to do this in testing for Agile. Follow me. I know what to do." It lacked slowly but surely this this concept of test process maturity that we'd actually worked quite hard at to get introduced into projects. Well, so there we have the situation. Have we gone back? Question mark. Have we gone back to the old immature days that we once had? Well, to a certain extent, and that's why I'm mentioning it, but not entirely. Be it just that people in the projects need a different approach to test process improvement, something that is more agile. We need to adapt the test process improvement method that we're using in agile projects to be in itself more agile. So that leads us perhaps then onto thinking about, what could we therefore do in the future, given that our process of test process improvement needs to become more agile. Well, the future for me, I've split into two blocks. One block is considering the organization. Now, the organization means any kind of entity in your company that is responsible for more than one project. Okay, so there'd be a collection of projects, and under those circumstances, it makes sense to try and develop some kind of overarching view of how to develop and test software. And from my point of view, I can see the benefit still, even in an agile world, for larger models such as TMMI to be used to assess the whole organization and their testing processes. So we still have the tools, we just need to mention to people at the organizational level that's what to do. Just a little anecdote, perhaps. I remember one time going to a customer, and the customer had a problem. The problem was that he had just been promoted into a position. He realized afterwards it wasn't really a promotion. He got promoted into a position where he was in charge of all of the agile projects. There was about a dozen of them, and he had no idea what each individual project was doing, and he had no idea whether they were using a common way of implementing Agile. And when I say implementing Agile, I mean the whole concept of Agile continuous integration and how it fits into the life cycle. So this poor guy obviously had a need, a demand for some kind of a maturity from the process that was being used. And I think that under that kind of situation, it's quite a viable thing, even in the future, for organizations to use a model such as TMMI. And because they've got more time usually to actually consider these overarching issues, you would have the time to use something like TMMI and adapt it to the agile world. Not perfect, but it can be done. So you would use that to gain a common understanding of what testing means in your organization, in your agile organization. Okay. So broad-based guidance and improvement across all projects. So this is sort of a little bit like saying, we're using Scrum in a project, but under, in multi-team projects, you would be using Scrum of Scrums. So it's a similar kind of thing. You start to realize what kinds of things can you implement for testing at an organizational level. Now, that's fine. And I think that means there is some hope for us, because that's a thread that leads all the way through the organizational improvement of test processes that we're familiar with, and we have some skills in that. However, for agile projects, I think that we have to adjust the actual focus of what we're looking at. At the project level now, not the organizational level, at the project level. The focus of our test process improvements has changed compared to previously, where perhaps there might be an emphasis on solid test strategies and good, well-developed test plans and such like. Heavyweight documents, some of them, and they all have their benefit, but the focus is changing from these document-based testing artifacts to, well, something else. So the focus is changing, more automation and tools. So you would be in your test process improvement approach, focusing much more heavily on how well you automate and how well the tools that you're using are actually implemented. How well is testing integrated into the overall development process, whether that's continuous integration, whether DevOps or whatever. Those are the things that if you looked into some models of the past, you won't find them, or you won't find them at the depth that you need them to be at if you're looking at agile projects. Okay. So here we have, the final point there of that short list. How the different communication rituals are implemented. It's no good now asking people to communicate, and that's a good thing. If you're looking at ways of actually improving the way you communicate, then for agile projects, you would look at all of the different communication rituals. You would look at how they're used. You'll have a look at how the actual rituals themselves can be used to focus attention on testing, how you can introduce different subjects and such like. Those things, as far as I'm aware, are not available at the moment in some kind of a consolidated form. Now, what you'd also be doing for agile projects in the future is you'd be not forgetting that you're from testing. For those of you that are from the testing area, the fundamentals of testing are still there. That's independent of the approach that you take, whether it's traditional or agile. So when you're looking at an agile project and considering test process improvement, don't forget the fundamentals. It's not like, everything's scrapped, everything from the old days gets thrown away. That's simply not the case. And so for agile projects in the future, don't forget the fundamentals. So, the final point, I think this is a really important point to finish off with, is the actual process of test process improvement has to change for the agile context. You cannot roll out an assessment model such as TMMI for a small project of 4 or 5 people that's working with Agile. Yes, you can do it theoretically, but it's not going to happen. They don't have the resources, they don't have the time to do that. So what we need in the future, I firmly believe, and I've done this, is we need to actually have fewer things that we look at, fewer things that we evaluate when we're saying, how good is our test process? We generally evaluate test processes by saying, here's a checkpoint. Are you doing this? Yes or no? You can still use that approach, but the suggestion here is the number of things that you're evaluating, the number of items should be less than about 50. Why is that? Because, well, my experience is that if you have less than 50, excuse me, you can do it in practically an hour, maybe 2 hours. You can go through those 50 points. That's doable compared to perhaps 2 to 3 days, which is not doable in an agile project, especially if it's small. And remember what we said earlier, a lot of agile projects are quite small. So what would you do as well that would be different for test process improvement in Agile? Yeah, less items, but those items are not given to you by some model. They're agreed within the project. Okay, so it could be, I agree with you. You might be saying, yeah, where are you going to get the ideas? You could consult one of these models like TMMI and say, is this for us? Is this important for us? Let's think about it from our project as a group. Let's collaborate on agreeing what the items are that we see as being important for our project for its testing. It could be something like, percentage of tests automated. It could be degree of integration with development. It could be particular rituals and particular opportunities for communication that involve testing. So you can sort of get the idea of a checklist almost of things that you're going to check through frequently, and that's going to be, as I say, my opinion, less than 50 points. You agree that in the project, and then you do self-assessment within the project. Now, I know a lot of you are going to might shrink away at the idea of self-assessment. Self-assessment is always a bit tricky because of our old friend bias. When you self-assess how good you are in a project, you do always tend to overestimate how good you are compared to somebody that comes along and does a totally neutral view of your project and comes out with some, let's say, unwanted truths. So self-assessment, but agreeing that particular bias can be a problem, the self-assessment by the project is a very powerful way of implementing test process improvement in an agile project. What you get is an opportunity with your agreed list of items that you're going to check, an opportunity to regularly self-assess as a group. You could do this in your retrospective. You could do this every third sprint. You could do this, you agree how often you're going to do this, and you're going to go through each time your 50 checkpoints, not just to ensure that you're improving, but also to ensure that you're not getting worse. And that's quite a big point that people miss with test process improvement, that you're not just trying to improve test processes, you're trying to stop them from getting worse. Um, so that's an easy trap to get into. So frequent assessment. So those 4 points: fewer items, agreed in the project, self-assessments done frequently. That for me is the future for agile projects when it comes to test process improvement. And I would challenge you to sit down with your project, sit down with people, perhaps at the next retrospective or the next planning meeting, and say, "Hey, come on, let's agree some of these points that we could use for for putting test process improvement, if you like, back on the map and stop it from slipping into this area of ad hoc that we don't really want." So, key messages then: test process improvement approaches have in the past and continue to be, especially at organizational level, great support. Okay. There is, however, a risk of losing our way in agile projects. And, the evidence that I have is not evidence that's been taken from some scientific study. It's just something that I've got from 100+ interviews. Um, there does seem to be a risk that we're losing our way in the area of test process improvement when it comes to agile projects. We're going back to kind of an ad hoc, nobody's really responsible. Do we need to do this kind of approach? Going back a little bit to the dark past in some cases, I'm sorry to say. However, future's still bright, if you like to call it that. In the future, if we get the right balance of approaches for the organization, if you're looking at an organizational improvement or for agile projects, you have an opportunity still to actually do constructive and valuable test process improvement. And I would ask you to think about those options that I suggested to you for working with smaller projects and agile projects, and using your nice agile checklists and so on in your agile projects. I think that the experience is that if you can make your test process improvement approach itself more agile, is going to be much more beneficial to your agile project. So that was pretty much it, guys. That was a quick session through all of the aspects, past, present, and future. I hope that you've picked up at least one or two ideas from that you could say, well, okay, maybe we could put test process improvement and testing a little bit more onto the map, even if you're working in a small agile project. So
Hi,
thanks for
Graham.
listening.
Hi, Graham. So, thank you so much for your presentation. And
Pleasure.
encourage everyone to ask any questions in the comment section. If you do have any, do let us know. So, currently, I have one question from one of the groups over here. So,
Mhm.
it says, what kind of communication rituals do you recommend to improve test process improvements? Are there maybe any tools available?
Any tools? Well, the tool that you use is the simplest tool, and that is a good old Excel sheet. It's just got 50 points in it, arranged in some logical sequence and grouped. And that's frankly, I mean, you can make it more sophisticated, but at the actual grassroots level, that's what you need. And each time you run through your Excel list of 50 points, you put in a red marker or a green marker if it's yes or no. If the point that you're considering is good in your project, then you mark it as green, and then you can see from evaluation to evaluation each time you get that checklist out, you can see the trend. Okay, so you're building up in your
Mm.
project, let's say at each retrospective, if that's when you're doing your checklist, if you're running through it at each retrospective, then you will see a sequence developing, okay, of reds and greens. And you might see things that are staying red forever. You might see red things become green as you improve. You might see green things staying where they are. That's good. And so on. What you don't want to see, of course, is green things going red. Okay. But
Yes.
that's the kind of thing that I would suggest that you do, and start small, build it up. And I think the important thing is have a fixed agenda point in something like your, let's say, retrospective, that says, ah, test process improvement, so that it always gets run through. And the more you run through it, the more that checklist becomes familiar to you. It's just like being a pilot. I used to fly an aeroplane. It's full of checklists. And the more you use them, the more you can recall them instantly and run through that checklist very quickly.
Well, thank you for that. I believe there was like a two-part question. They were also asking if there is any kind of communication ways that you recommend to improve test process improvement.
Well, communication ways of communicating. So to actually improve test processes by communicating, is that what you mean?
I think that's what they mean.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, the simplest way that communication helps with uh, uh, getting test processes improved is you're talking together, which is one of the fundamental benefits of Agile in itself. So you're
Mm.
talking, but you're talking about testing. So you know, fundamentally, any form of communication, any of these rituals that you have, and you have them at a daily level, um, or at a planning level, sprint level, or at a retrospective level, you've got a lot of opportunities. Just choose the right time, and that communication will ultimately start to, if you like, replace some of the more traditional things that we did in testing, like the big test plans. You know, these days, where are the test plans in an agile project? They're on a task board somewhere. They're being talked about every day in stand-ups. There are tasks being moved around. There's maybe Kanban boards being used to actually track the progress of items from development into testing and from there onwards. So all of those things are, if you like, communication, communication between people using the tools that you have. And that's where people do tend to use communication for introducing some testing improvements. I hope that
Thank
that's
you.
answered your question, whoever it was.
I hope it does. We have here another one
Yeah.
from Martin. He says, "How close ISTQB applies TMMI?"
Well, actually, ISTQB does not apply TMMI. It doesn't apply any model as such because ISTQB is neutral of these things. So the only time that you will see TMMI mentioned in ISTQB is in the improving the test process syllabus, which is at expert level, where there's a review of the available test process improvement models. And that would include TMMI and TPI next and such like. So there is content in the expert level improving the test process that deals with TMMI. However, TMMI is also closely linked to ISTQB from an organizational point of view. We talk together closely, so there's a strong link there.
Thank you for that question, Martin. I hope that answers your question. So I think those are all the questions that I have so
Okay.
far. But if anyone does have any further questions, I do encourage you to put them in the comments section, and we can always come back to these later on as well. I don't know if there's a particular email that you would like me also to share, Graham, with the people watching also later on.
Yeah, you can do that. Yeah, I have my German testing board email address. I think that you must have that.
Yeah, I can
You can
put this in
share
the
that with
comments
you.
areas exactly, or you can just contact us to the Congress
Yeah,
emails if you do have any more questions for Graham, and we're more than happy
yeah.
to come back to you with any answers. I'm gonna be adding this later on in the comments area. So that will be congress at a4q.eu. So if you send us an email there, we can always come back to you and send you the email from Graham if you do have any further questions. Thank you once again, Graham, for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Such an interesting presentation. For anyone that is waiting for the next session, do stay tuned. The next session is going to be starting shortly. So thank you once again to Graham. And thank you, everyone, for joining us as well.
Bye bye, everybody. Have a
Take
good day.
care.